So anytime I am dealing with, or the world is dealing with, a large scale issue which affects many people in many different ways, and there's many points of view, I do my very best to educate myself on all the points of view, fully aware of my biases. I'm acutely aware that in this situation, as a two-spirit queer person that is engaged to a woman, and in my worldview married to her, and exploring my own gender identity, gender expression, that I am a feminist who believes that the patriarchal controls which have existed should end. I am someone who is not anti-religion, but in a lot of ways anti-religion. I'm very aware. I have been through religious systems through multiple layers of my life, multiple different systems, and I am educated on the ways in which they control and manipulate behaviors, or seek to ratify people from the guilt or accountability that they might feel as a result of being human. I am political, and I am definitely on the left. And I am Indigenous, so therefore I am very aware of the ways in which white nationalism has impacted me and my life and the people in my community, and have educated myself extensively on how to identify it and where it exists and what systems I do have influence on. Being a white-coated Indigenous person with light eyes and light skin and light hair, and in positions of privilege in those spaces where people who have dark skin, dark eyes, dark hair don't. And I am also moderately pro-socialist. I would not call myself a communist. I do believe that the capitalist system has failed us in many ways. I believe that the capitalist system has empowered us in many ways, and I believe that we can find a better evolution for human the exchange of goods and labor in our biosphere. I'm an environmentalist. These are just some of my biases that I am acutely aware of, that shape my perception of the situation, that shape my intake of information. And so I know that when I'm looking at something, I'm like, oh, that's so stupid. What do you mean transhumanists, so that we can augment our bodies, or let go of our bodies and augment our brain onto a computer so that we can travel the planet? Actually, as somebody who has studied technology, I know that's not impossible. And that is the direction that some technocratic people are going. Does that mean that that's entirely behind this? No. But it's not entirely impossible. Some people would love to leave their bodies behind. So when I'm looking at a big system like this, I try and look at all points of view, try and look at it with the awareness of my bias, and then I try and look at it as if I were the Queen of Earth. If my job was to find a solution which appeases everyone, what would I do? And It's a difficult mindset to put yourself in, but I think it's really important for all of us to be able to put ourselves in that perception, right? Because when you imagine yourself as a monarch, as Her Majesty, as somebody who is in charge of the well-being and care for all people, which is an entirely European approach to it, you give yourself absolute power over a situation in your imagination. So what are you going to do with that power? And I recognize that there are some people on here that were they given that, they would just erase me. They would just make an effort to annihilate anyone who identifies as anything other than the binary gender or singular sexuality identity. And so when you put yourself in that mindset, you have to ask yourself, is that what I would do? And does that align with the ethics of where I live, the religion I belong to, the society I belong to, right? Like in Canada, we believe in freedom. So we do not end people if they are different from us. We tried it, didn't work, really problematic, and resulted in generations of trauma, which we are still feeling today. So, we don't want to pull a pink triangle World War II Nazi Germany and try to eliminate anybody who has a sexuality that is different from the binary singular system. Because that's not who we are as a nation, as a people. And so as I put on my crown, I recognize that there are some people who are not ever going to feel at home in this nation for a variety of reasons. I am acutely aware of the concept of homeland. As an Indigenous person, part of my identity is a connection to an ancestral homeland and what those teachings of that land led me to understand about myself. So I am aware that there are people who are displaced, who are experiencing dysphoria for various reasons. They have left their countries of origin, they have been forced out, they have chosen to leave, they have removed themselves from the lands upon which them or their ancestors originated, and as such experience a cognitive dissonance where they think it should be like this because that's what they are familiar with, but it's like that. And they can't make the two meet. So this is what is ingrained into their childhood or their DNA or their lived experience as a young person. So this is right and this is wrong. So the effort is to try and change it. Can't change other people. It's not appropriate. You have to change yourself and make changes within yourself. So, I strongly support the Rainbow Railroad, which is an initiative that's been going on, I believe, since the 1980s, in which people who are living in countries where they are subjugated to criminal charges or the risk of their lives ending as a result of being 2S LGBTQAI come to Canada because they have rights here. And so I have always strongly welcomed and encouraged and mentioned it to people, supported it financially, and I believe that needs to continue. Canada needs to continue to be a safe haven for all genders and all sexualities within the confines of consent, age of consent. That's it. And so, as Queen of Earth, if I was given a magic wand, there's some people that will just be happier in Texas. There are some people who will just be happier not here. And that's okay. Or there are people who would be happier if they created a commune, not unlike the Hutterites that live all over Alberta, and they start and run their own community, their own schools, their own teachings, and they are quite comfortable being separated from society within their own spaces. And that's good too. So I would probably decree that those people need to make those choices about what they're going to do. First and foremost, if you cannot accept the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms as it currently exists, and that you feel the need to try and manipulate government systems in order to disrupt the human rights and freedoms of other people, you need to ask yourself if you belong here, or if you need to go somewhere where the rights and freedoms more closely align to what you expect from a nation. And that one is one of the catalysts of this whole protest, apparently. One of the talks that I sat in on, they said that it was a teacher speaking to a Muslim student, and the teacher said, we, as a class, as a school, sat with you and celebrated Ramadan and honored your differences from us and learned about you and educated ourselves about you, and you in turn reject our people who are non-binary, who are within the queer community, and learning about them and showing them respect. And if you're going to do that, you don't belong in Canada. That was the catalyst for a lot of this, for a lot of people's backlash. And the way she said it, maybe a little fiery. Not entirely wrong. Not entirely wrong. There is a lot of validity to recognizing that you are just occupying a space that you are not comfortable in and you need to move. Whether that's a job you're not comfortable in, or whether it is a residence in a country that you are not comfortable in. And that can apply to people who have recently come to Canada or been here for generations. And it can be for reasons of rejecting the way things are here, or just looking somewhere else in the world and saying, no, I think that would work better for me. Right? That's not, it does not have to come from a place of discrimination to recognize that some people aren't going to be comfortable in Canada. Some people will be more comfortable in Texas, where they can carry a gun freely without background checks or mental health checks, or, you might be more comfortable there, and that might be a place where you would prefer to live, and that's okay. And that's not a discrimination. Next. What's my next solution? Part of this backlash, I still feel strongly, is because SOGI has been in place for 5 years. And so the kids that were 5 or 6 are now 11 or 12. and they have adopted these ideas, and their families despise it because it is contrary to what they learned growing up. It is contrary to what they religiously believe. It is contrary to what they always thought was truth. And this is just a difficult pill for them to swallow, like learning Neptune wasn't a planet, or learning, I can't think of another example, but learning that cigarettes aren't good for you. Right? Like there's been entire generations that have been told one set of information, and then it has been proven wrong, and the entire society has had to pivot and make adjustments. We don't smoke in restaurants anymore. And that is because we learned that the generations before us were mistaken about cigarettes being healthy for you. We are now in an age where the binary construct of gender, on a limited scientific understanding and the intentional effort by religious organizations to control people, has perpetuated the binary construct as the only construct, omitting all the other variances that existed throughout time, history, up until today. And we have now discovered a better understanding of sex as it exists within the biological sphere, and gender as it exists within the social sphere. And we respect the existence of all. Doctors no longer force infants to go through gender-affirming surgeries at their parents' whim when they are born intersex. That is highly discouraged because of the traumatic long-term effects on those infants. We now recognize that when those infants grow up into children and are forced to conform to a gender that is not theirs, they are more highly likely to cause themselves or others harm. So we don't do it. Instead, we affirm that as children who are sovereign individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and experiences, begin to express that their gender or sexuality is any of the variations which exist, we affirm them. We say, good job. Because when we tell children what you're experiencing isn't valid, that invalidation morphs into mental health struggles like borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is often rooted in parents invalidating the child's experiences and them having to find a way to adapt to that hostile environment where they were not validated, and instead choosing to develop maladaptive practices, which is identified in borderline personality symptoms. So we know as a society, it is better to validate, affirm, and encourage the healthy development of children. That said, along with the solution, so solution number one, some people aren't going to be comfortable here, some people are. Finding their place in the world is a solution. And of course, as a monarch, I would love to be able to just make that easy and free, but I'm not there yet. Second, deconstruct the binary. If you as a religious person want to maintain the binary as part of your belief system and indoctrinate your children to that belief system, absolutely go ahead. You have the freedom here in Canada to do that. You do not have the freedom to tell other people and other parents how they are going to do that to their children. The third more support for kids. Oh my God, this is such a big topic. These generations of children are contending with technology for their parents' attention. Their parents are working in gig economies. Some of them are working 4 jobs just to keep by, to keep the roof over the head. Financial disparity. Like, technology is a big one. You know, when your parents get home from work, they're physically, mentally, spiritually exhausted from appeasing the owner class, and as the worker class, they still have to maintain their home, raise their children, pay their bills. They're exhausted. And this all comes from capitalist individualism, okay, that we live in singular generation homes or dual generation homes rather than multi-generational homes, where we had the grandparents to help support the care of the children, or the aunts or the uncles or what have you. So we have like many layers of exhausting people, like, and this goes back to the broken system, exhausting people to the point where when they get home, they just want to tune out, watch TV, play a video game. They are not interested in their children, not because they don't love them, but because they emotionally do not and mentally do not have the capacity. So yeah, there's a universal basic income to ensure that parents are not forced to work extreme levels to avoid poverty-like situations. And in order to enact universal basic income, I would probably tax the churches and religious institutions. Further, you know, making sure that single parents are given options for communities of raising children rather than isolation of raising children. If we can't get there right away, it would be great to have more counselors, more peer support programs, more elder support programs, more all forms like mentoring and 1,000 different ways that we could give children more autonomy to get help themselves if they are struggling. If they are struggling through puberty with a sense of self, to send them somewhere, to a counselor, to a peer support person, where they can talk openly and freely without being led, without being judged, without being told you're wrong, you're right, it's this, no, it's that, and encouraging them to explore healing options. If a child is found to be transgender, honoring and affirming that. If a child is isolated and feels that the only way that they can build friends is by identifying as transgender in order to have a community around them, build a better community. So then we got so that's three solutions. Fourth solution, socialized medicine. Currently in Canada, the majority of our medicine, with the exception of our pharmacare, is socialized. This means that our taxpayer dollars go into the system to maintain it, to grow it, and support it, and therefore it is free, and we are rarely required to pay out of pocket for things that are necessary to maintain human health. We do this because we recognize that healthy communities cost less. If somebody is unhealthy due to malnutrition, homelessness, addiction, or untreated mental health, it costs us more in the way of policing, emergency services, treatments, things of this nature. So our medicine is socialized in order to ensure that our society is the best it can be through medical treatment, through scientific approaches to the best possible medical solutions available. However, within Canada, we do not make our own medicines the same way. It's all done through a capitalist system. All of our pharmacare is done through a corporation that produces the medication. And we, taxpayers, through the government, pay for those medications to be brought to Canada and then pay again to purchase them at the pharmacy in many cases, unless we have coverage of some kind, or unless it's an initiative to improve community health, like a vaccine or a Narcan treatment for the opioid crisis. So by socializing medicine, by ensuring that all prescriptions, all development of medical treatments is done here in Canada by citizens, for the benefit of citizens, which is somewhat communist, we will ensure that we are not being exploited by a capitalist system of control, which is supposedly, allegedly, pushing children and people into transgender treatments and reproductive options for profit's sake. So if we have a group of people who are afraid of big pharma and tech hijacking our ability to care for ourselves through medicine, through healthcare, then we need to take the power back for that. That does not look like separatist Alberta. That does not look like a two-tier system. That approach is more socialist and less capitalist, which makes it a challenge considering the current climate fear in which all socialists are bad and freeloading off of the wealthy, even though they pay taxes too. It's difficult to convince people to do that, unless it is within the context of ensuring that Alberta is a sovereign, independent nation from Canada and we make our own decisions, right? That seems to sell for a French majority. And so that would be my fourth solution, is socialized medicine nationwide, universal pharmacare, and ensuring that all of our treatments and elective treatments and complementary treatments such as natural medicine, healthy fruits and vegetables, dietary treatments, chiropractic, massage, acupuncture, all of that is covered and supported. Therapy is invested in on a massive scale. So if people are feeling isolation, we can address those issues on a bigger scale. I believe personally that the majority of these groups have banded together because of the isolation that resulted from COVID. And that if there were more community initiatives that allowed them to express the trauma of having gone through the isolation without an agenda of oppressing someone else, they wouldn't be doing this. You know, if we had, as soon as COVID started to reduce, and I'm positive for COVID right now, but if we had a group of people who could come together and just talk about how much it sucked to experience COVID, to experience a pandemic, a global pandemic, which had been predicted for the last 20 years of my life and was no surprise, but really unfortunate, then a lot of this would not be happening. So I guess number 5 would be increased social services, increased psychiatric care, psychological supports, therapy supports, peer supports, not pay to play activities and outings, you know, empowering people to build community together, whether it's for creative artistic reasons or exercise or just talking or just socializing or just playing pool. You know, like a lot of those activities have been lost and replaced with bitching to each other on the internet. So those are 5 solutions. Is that enough to fix everything for everyone? Nope. Can't make everyone happy all the time. You know, and the reality is, like, it won't ever be good enough for everyone. You know, in dialectical behavioral therapy, we talked a lot about range of tolerance. You know, what can you live with? Can you live with your child going to school and learning that their BFF identifies as they instead of a he? And then when the child comes home, you have a conversation with them and say, I don't understand any of that, and I'm having a hard time with this whole concept. And then you seeking education and support and understanding around what it is and why it is. The same way we had to when the anti-Muslim xenophobic panic was happening, and we were all convinced that all of the people that were coming from Muslim communities to Canada were a risk. We learned that they are not. They are not all a risk. You know, I look back at, I regularly through this have looked back at the satanic panic of the 1990s, which were, you know, it was funny, like people like Alex Cooper supposedly a chicken's head off or a bat's head off on stage and threw it back out to the audience, and that everybody was listening to these discs and they were risking harming themselves, and there was like these massive cults that were trying to steal people's children, and it was massive. It was for years they were freaking out about this stuff. All of it unfounded fear mongering after extensive investigations into multiple organizations, into situations that people claim they had been in, groups that claim that they were those things. They went through all of it, and the entire panic was unfounded in fact. And Alex Cooper, somebody brought the chicken and it was already in bad shape by the time it hit him on stage. Didn't do anything to him. So there's video right? So there's just like these layers on layers and layers of times throughout history where there has been mass panic, misinformation, division, and fear-mongering. And we're just in another one of those. We're just in another era of those events happening. And it just happened to fall on the heels of the internet, rise of the internet, rise of capitalism, and now the fall of capitalism, which we are currently experiencing, which is quite the thing. And gender and sexual orientation no longer being criminalized or treated like a mental illness. So yeah, it's been like an hour and a half that I've been babbling on. I'm a Gemini, so I can talk a lot for a lot of different topics, but I just had to get all this out because I was so distressed, right? Because like my fear is that as a result of this hysteria, there will be an effort to harm me, to harm my wife, to harm our family, to erase us, to make us, to make it so that when children are learning, so if our kids go to school and they say my family has two moms, they just shut her down. They say, no, you're not allowed to talk about your family. Or if someone is at a school, growing up at a school, and says, I identify as, they're just going to shut them down or send them to a hospital like they did way back when. Like that's my fear, is that's what will come from all this. I know that a lot of people who were on that side feel that they are not being hateful. They are not aware that they are inflicting violence. They are not aware that they are causing harm to people in their families, in their communities, right? There absolutely are people who are well aware of the harm that they're creating, and they want to harm us, and they want us to feel pain. But there are some people who genuinely are like, I've never had a problem before, but I don't want these kids to look at pornography, and not taking the time to realize they're not being given pornography, and that they have been duped into fear-mongering. I don't know what else to say now. I feel like I've gone over most of it. In an ideal world, we get to a place where, you know, and they talked about this in the SOGI curriculum outline. They talked about a post-gay world, and that I thought that was great. You know, a place where, you know, a child talking about their two moms or their non-binary parent is a non-issue, is not a thing, is not cause for concern. Because if you are somebody who has taught your children that is not what our religion believes, you're not threatened by someone else's family structure. You just realize that you, when you get home, have a discussion with your child and say, this is actually how we feel, you know, or a world in which like all of our rights and freedoms are intact and not a debate. Right now, they are a debate. Right now, people are debating whether or not we deserve to be included in a child's education. And they are saying that our existence is not worthy of discussion in a child's education. And shortly before I hit junior high, there was a teacher in my hometown, from what I understood, that was a Holocaust denier that denied the existence of the Holocaust and what it did to millions of people and the intergenerational effects of what that did. Today, there are still people who discount the testimony of living Indigenous people who were subjected to residential schools, to foster care systems, to day schools, to forced sterilization, to apprehension of their children without cause. People have given testimony about this, and there are still people today who deny that that was a problem, or that it has ripple effects throughout the entire community. All of us are affected by those acts. How are all of us affected by those acts, Heather? Well, all right, let's break it down. So a Indigenous person is forced out of their home, forced to go to residential school, cut their hair, remove their culture, force them to be indoctrinated into religious propaganda, and deny them the opportunity to learn how to properly parent their child. From the trauma, they adopt alcoholism. Their child is raised in a situation where they are coping with their trauma in unhealthy ways because there is no resources available for them to cope with that trauma. They pass on that trauma to their child. So their child is now acting from a place of unhealed trauma, where they are angry, potentially engaged in addictions or any other type of violent behavior, which is then costing taxpayers for policing, which is then harming them physically, mentally, and emotionally, and they are sick, and this is a medical issue, and we see them out in the community because they are unhoused and they are forced to experience the worst moments of their lives, not in the privacy of their own bedroom, but out in the public sphere. So then we feel the effects of their trauma experiences out in public, and we are then traumatized by that. But we try to dehumanize it and view this person as someone who is different from us, either through race or experience or life circumstances or whatever. We try and dehumanize them from us so that we can deal with our trauma without allowing their pain to impact us, so that we go home and we see those similar things acted out in social spheres or within our own family. We see our own children develop an addiction or a criminal behavior, and instead of addressing the cause of that behavior, we associate it to the trauma that we experienced when we saw this person out in the world, and so we end up dehumanizing our own family members. My kid is just a dropout. My kid is just a blah. So then your child has trauma. So then they go out and they cause havoc through their trauma of being alienated from you because you have experienced this, and so now you have passed it on to your child. And now your child is out in the world sharing that trauma the same way that you experienced it from seeing that Indigenous person. So when I say we all experience it as a community, it's a real thing. And I wish it could have been different when we came out of COVID. I wish we could have all just recognized, hey, we're dealing with a collective trauma. why don't we just sit down in some talking circles and get it out? Right now, we are in the midst of this Indigenous Renaissance, and there are people who are realizing that their ancestors did harm. So talk it out. Indigenous people are talking it out amongst themselves and within communities, and people who are living with addictions or behavior problems or internet addictions as a result of trying to avoid feeling the pain of the trauma. We are losing ourselves in video games and online. Instead, if we found a way to just come together and build community and talk and communicate, wouldn't that be wild? Yeah. Is it impossible? I don't think it is. Wouldn't that be wild, hey? I mean, I've sat in so many circles: trauma recovery, addiction recovery, grief recovery, artist recovery, queer recovery. You know, like that's what I have done throughout my life. You know, and some people say, oh, you're a professional victim. Okay, if that's what you want to frame it as. I see it as somebody who has had the courage to look at the ugliest parts of myself, own them, heal them, and try and become more than what I was given. So, I mean, why can't we do that instead? Why can't, and I guess it comes back to, like, you know, people are saying, well, we need religion back in schools, right? Because that was the place where people came together to heal. And now, because of the capitalist system, healing is a product, right? Counseling, coaching, peer support, these are all industries. And we can't, within our capacity, do them without financial compensation for them. I could not run Indigenous addiction treatment workshops without some form of compensation for my time, energy, gas, supplies, tuition. I couldn't. I would go poor. And so it blows my mind that, you know, it could be so simple to just enact universal basic income. The people who want to run these workshops and groups to help people recover from the trauma of the things they've experienced will be financially supported in order to do so. The people who are losing their jobs through the introduction of tech, AI, automation will have an option and will not be facing homelessness and poverty, right? We will not see each other as competition for our basic needs. We will see each other as peers who are going through a similar struggle in life. Yeah. And I mean, on top of, like, I say I would make UBI a reality by taxing churches. I would also address some of the astronomically impossible wealth that exists. Nobody needs $158 billion. Like, that means, I think somebody broke it down. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think they said that means that they could give 1 billion people $1 million and would still have $1 billion left. Like, I can't even understand that level of money. And it shouldn't, I don't think we need to have that level of wealth without a level of accountability for it. So, yeah. And my solutions are problematic to some people too. They're like, well, if we have universal basic income, then the price of everything will go up and they will just price gouge us. So it's like, well, That's what laws are for. You know, laws are put in place by governments to hold businesses accountable, to ensure that they are not gouging for their services, like price fixing, which is a concern in food right now, and unfairly expecting people to pay more than the product is worth. Rent caps. There is no reason that we should have. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent, but I'll finish this one thought. There's no reason why we should have housing here in Canada, which is owned by somebody in another country, where our money is going to that country instead of staying here. There is no reason why we should have rent hikes of $900 in 1 month. If somebody was not smart enough to put their rental property on a fixed interest rate, they shouldn't be a landlord. They shouldn't be trying to be a landlord, right? I think the whole idea of renters and landlords is despicable, and there's better systems. There's better systems. That's what it all comes back to. Like, ownership is not the end all be all of best ideas that humans have ever come up with. Capitalism is not going to be the pinnacle of humans' evolution. At least I hope it isn't. So anyway, those are my solutions. Thank you for listening to my 2-hour talk on trends, issues, the protests against SOGI education in schools, and the factors which led us to this moment. And I just want to close by showing my love and appreciation to all the people in the queer community, to all the supporters who came out in droves, in numbers, in rain, to show love and support for our community. You are wonderful. You are loved. And I wish you many blessings, much support, and community around you as we go through this difficult period in history towards a better future. Thanks for listening.